So what I'd like to do, if you want to bear with me here for this session, is I want to start off and go over a very brief overview of the systems, and then I'm going to go over a totally new class that we've kind of put together as reps to kind of go over tips and tricks on how to really maximize your system. I mean, is that going to be all right? Yeah. Okay. And if anybody has any questions, I'll probably like try to break at some points, give my voice a little bit of a breathing room so that we can talk together a little bit about what we're doing, okay? So this is me. I have my Instagram on here, so I need all the followers I can get, so please follow me. That's your first assignment. This is some of my work, past and present. I did a lot of music editorial stuff and portraiture and sports, so. That's just to give me street credit to you guys, okay? I mean, some work. All right, so first and foremost, this is the A7 series of cameras. The A7 and the A7R were introduced about 4 years ago. They were the first entry foray into mirrorless full-frame cameras. They were some of the first. Actually, the first full-frame camera was the Sony RX1 and the RX1R, which is a fixed 35mm f2 lens. After the success of that camera, they brought into play the A7 and the A7R. The A7R was pretty much built with a Nikon D800 sensor. It's about a 36 megapixel sensor. And these systems are the smallest full frame cameras on the planet. A7R, what does R stand for? Resolution. Okay, thank you. Okay. These are the highest resolving cameras that we have right now. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the 2 means in just a second. But before I do, does anyone know what the S stands for? Sensitivity. It's the highest resolving low light sensor on the planet. You can get an ISO's excess basing out at 3200, all the way expandable up to 409,000. If you need to, I'm just saying, it's out there. So we all know full frame, APS-C. I don't need to skirt around this issue, right? We're all familiar with full frame versus APS-C. Good. Okay. This is what separates the A7 II series from Series 1. This is what we learned from the baseline after selling a lot of these cameras. We enhanced the chassis with a magnesium alloy chassis with some increased weather sealing to be like some of your higher power professional DSLRs. A refined grip for especially those of us, and I don't know, let me see a show of hands. How many people love to use third-party lenses on these cameras? Anybody? Okay, all right. Dust and moisture resistance. Basically, you're dealing with a naked sensor in front of this camera. So unlike DSLRs, which have a mirror to have some type of protection, this is very exposed. So we have a fail-safe mechanism, which is an anti-static coating and vibrating device. So every time you turn the camera on and off, it's going to reduce dust. Autofocus. Does anyone know why the mirrorless systems really take advantage of autofocusing? Basically, from a DSLR standpoint, when you have a mirror that's in front of your sensor, you have your cluster of autofocus points basically breathing right through the mirror into the body of the sensor, which then translates into your, which will produce your images. Since we don't have a mirror, we can use the full breadth of the sensor to take full advantage almost edge to edge. That's where we have some of these advantages beyond the size capability of a mirrorless over a DSLR. Viewfinder, what you see is what you get. We have a 0.78 magnification. Zeiss tests our viewfinder in most of our bodies in the A7R2 and the A7S2. But what's also is really fascinating about these cameras is the image stabilization. So you've got a 5-axis image stabilizer that's built onto the face of the sensor. So for example, if I were to go over and take off the lens of that camera and I just took it up here and just did a little shake and a jig for you, you are actually going to see the sensor vibrate. It compensates for all the control. So even non-image stabilized lenses, you can hold handheld up to 4.5 times more stops than a typical lens, okay? Now let me ask you a question here real quick. When would you, I'm just going to put this out there, when would you not want to use image stabilization? On a tripod, exactly, especially for some of your longer exposures. Make sure that it is turned off. I cannot tell you how many classes I come to, and I was on a tripod. The image stabilized tripods will tend to kind of trick it out a little bit. So, not to mention it will suck your battery a little bit more too. So with the on-body stabilization, you get to do some really wonderful images that you wouldn't normally be able to do handheld. All right, this, for example, this is after I just opened and unboxed my A7S II for the first time and decided, after 2 cups of coffee, to shoot something. This is just an example of the image stabilization. It's not meant to be anything really pretty, but this is my wife. Say hi. This is my kid's room. I just started cleaning up. So that just shows you handheld what it looks like. I mean, I encourage you, if you haven't seen it, and I know a lot of people do here, how many of you have Series 1 cameras? Or is everyone a Series 2? Okay. So you already know the fruits for these things. So let me go into here. This was also...
I had a very long, I had this, now we have this, but I had the A260. It's very heavy.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to make a quick announcement.
Cool. All right, it's the world's highest viewfinder magnification. I'm not sure the typical DSLR magnification. I believe it's 0.57, but ours are 0.78. So you are going to see more of the range of what your image is going to be looking like coming out of the camera. What you see is what you get: viewfinder, depth of field, exposure, color balance, density, special effects if you want to do black and white, sepia tones, all that other fun stuff. Those are all right in there on the viewfinder. So your guessing game gets reduced and more keepers, okay? Wi-Fi. How many people do not use Wi-Fi? Really? Okay, get on it. Okay. I can't tell you how much, I mean, here, let me just real quickly here. I'm going to tell you, this is my camera roll. I just put this on last night on my phone. Nope. So, this is my camera roll from my phone that I just post. I can't tell you, I will just take images, fire it right over, and immediately post it. I will tell you, though, that the one caveat, and I encourage you to do, is to never forget to dump your cards on the camera, on the computer. The past couple of weeks, I've found myself been like, did I log it into Lightroom or Capture One? It gets so easy to just have a post-production process and that's really streamlined, just to go from your camera to phone to online, that sometimes you neglect the fact to bring everything in, especially for me. I mean, I really like to exhibit some of my work. So I think I'm just gonna tell you that's one good piece of advice for you. I'm gonna look at the slides right now, but I think what I really wanna do is I wanna go into our tips and tricks. So we got together and pretty much put all the tools together, what would basically, for those of us, because we all know these cameras are very hard to maneuver in some areas, namely the menu settings. So we're going to try to bypass, we're going to make you feel a little bit more comfortable, okay? And I want to take at least 2 to 3 nuggets that you guys are going to be taking out of this class today. They're going to be like, okay, this is worth the price of admission, which I don't think was anything, but still. Sony likes to give a lot into their cameras, but they don't like to take away too many things. So most of the things that you're going to see in the 6300, they are going to be carrying over. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm much more of a less is more type photographer. I came from the film days, I'm old school, so some of these things you may hear me kind of be like under my breath, why would you want to do this type of thing? But there are certain things that people want, and it's important for you to realize exactly what they are, okay? If you have a camera and you have anything, take a picture of this, please, or look it up online, because this is honestly the best online resources that we could put together for your cameras. You've got all things Sony Alpha. Those of us that help contribute to alphauniverse.com, that's where a lot of people dedicate a lot of resources, a lot of videos, classes, where you can find out about upcoming classes, events and elements, certain things. That's where you want to go. Brian Smith, who those of you who don't know, he's pretty much one of Sony's oldest ambassadors and probably has the highest pedigree of any of our artisans. And he knows more about these software upgrades and little tips and tricks pretty much sooner than anybody. Like if you see him on the street, just stop. I mean, he will talk your ear off about these cameras. So we got Brian here, esupport.sony.com. We are going to go over this probably in the next slide or two. This is all about firmware. And I can't encourage you enough. I get so many questions come up. I'm not autofocusing right. My camera's overheating, blah, blah, blah. Certain things like this. All of this is 99% probably correctable by making sure that your firmware is up to date. We have a lot of products that keep coming out, and honestly, with the compatibility, you really have to make sure that you are on the top in pole position with your firmware. Play memories, camera apps. How many of you use apps? Anybody? Yay! All right. Okay. Do you like them? Because I'm still kind of. No, I love the apps. I have not been able to sit down and just go out and just do Sky. We're going to talk about it, but Sky HDR and stuff like that. And if anyone is having any type of problems with any of their gear afterwards, I'll be happy to sit down and at least show you and see if we can troubleshoot a little bit, okay? You did come out in this heat, by the way. First step, firmware upgrades, guys. All right, those of you pretty much that don't know where your firmware upgrade is, it's basically going to be in the last tab of your camera. And we need to check which one you have, because some people really buy their camera and they don't keep up with it. Like if you're not following Brian Smith or Sony Alpha Rumors or any of these other, alphauniverse.com basically is where you should be going pretty much at the beginning of each day to see what anything is new. They will tell you that firmware has just dropped. In fact, the 6300 just had a very important firmware drop last week. So if you don't have it, please upgrade your 6300. But this doesn't just go for camera bodies, remember. This goes for the lenses. We have a whole new series of lenses that we're going to be talking about here. And they are so complex, and their interface with these cameras is just to make them work well together, make sure that everything is up to date. All right, the way that you do your firmware update, you're basically going to connect. This is very important too for those of you that haven't ventured it. It's almost like you have to have surgical precision, because you have to hook your USB up to your camera, put it into the computer, download the update, follow the instructions to the T to make sure that that goes. And by all, please do not ever disconnect during the middle of a firmware update, because it is totally rebooting your system. It's like installing Windows. So if something happens in the middle of an installation, it could lead to some problems. So this is the website right here. So you see you have an A7 R2. You're going to select your operating system. You're going to the update. So okay, yes, version 3.2. It's 254 megabytes. Like I said, it's a can be very large. You connect the camera, and then you can just run through step by step. Don't rush it, and it'll be golden.
How often it happens?
Typically every 2 months. I mean, look, Sony, if anything, is very, very good about listening to what you guys want on these cameras. I mean, almost to a fault, in my opinion, but they really try to pack everything that they can in. I had engineers here 2 weeks ago that I had to take around B&H that were here from Japan, just going over every nuance, what every customer was talking about, what they wanted, the display models, everything. So honestly, and they will try to do it and they'll pack it in, but especially if you're concerned about power, battery life, extending every little bit of juice you can get out of the camera. I mean, they're doing everything they can, because remember, you have the smallest full-frame camera in the market. I mean, with great power comes great responsibility. I mean, you're not talking about huge DSLRs, so a lot of these things are just so microscopic, and they just take so much time to deliver. They just off the assembly line, and especially when we talk about the A7S2 is a completely different sensor than the A7 R2. So certain features are going to be different. So it's going to be a totally different firmware pack. Extending the battery life. This is what you guys all want, right? Everybody want? Okay, all right. Okay. Okay, what is there? I know there have been a few people that have seen how many people here have seen me speak here before? All right, I've got 1, 2. Okay, did you take anything away on the battery life? Because I want to make sure that you guys, okay. This is one of your price admission bullet points here, right? This is one of your commandments. Let's go over this here. Turn on airplane mode. So those of you, when you are not using your wireless, basically you're going to go in, you're going to scroll over to the third tab in your menu. That's going to be your Wi-Fi, and it's going to go airplane mode, turn it on. When it is not on, your wireless is always running, and it is always cycling and looking for a hotspot. It's looking for your phone. It's looking for anything. turn the pre-A off. That's probably the most important thing to do. Whenever I get any new camera of our system, the first thing I do is turn off the pre-AF function. What that means is that if you have an autofocusing lens of ours, we want to make our autofocus as fast as possible. So there are those people that like, if you have it on your hip and you want to bring it up really quick and you're going to get something pretty much in focus because it's ready to go before you are. The thing is, it's always running. So turn it off. That's going to be in your gear menu. So that's going to be in the second tab. That's where the pre-AF function is. Auto review, I mean, that comes back from the DSLR days. I shoot a lot of professional sports, so I have to, if I'm squeezing off a few thousand frames per gig, I can't have a reviewing constantly on, so I always turn my image review off. So if you want to look at one of your images, you just simply go down and hit your play button. You can also you have a very high resolution display on back of the camera, and this is one little tidbit I do want to tell you, is that contrary to popular belief, that when you are running your rear screen, you are drawing less battery power from that than you would be if you're going through your magnifier, your viewfinder.
So live view is less power.
That is less power. I know. When I was going over the power specs on that, I got a little bit surprised too, but that is very true. Now, also to extend the battery life, obviously, you have the option of getting battery grips. So that will take to the batteries. That's another way to do it. I actually had someone who told me, I had a gentleman, you can go bug him there. Mike out at the kiosk said that he used 2 batteries for a full day shoot last week, and he, for a big modeling gig, and he only used 2 batteries, and I think he has his camera set just to this, so. I mean, maybe that adds a little bit of credence. I mean, whenever I'm shooting, I don't really seem to have a lot of problem with battery life either, but I do know that it's a little bit of concern. Again, you're dealing with a much smaller form factor, smaller lithium batteries. So just please, this is the proper way to do it. Now, therefore, I don't know, how else, does anyone else power their camera differently? Because believe me, there are other ways to do it. If those of you didn't know that, let me just see here. Here, let me go back one second. That with the A7 R2 and the A7 S2, and I think even the A6300, you can power via USB. It's in your power setup all the way over in your toolbox. You can just change and USB power on, and you can power the camera through that. So did you guys not know that, or did you know that? Okay, there you go. You can power those cameras via USB. There are also those of you, and we don't openly advertise this because we don't make these products, but I know that there are a certain amount of shooters that go on Amazon and they're using these Amazon USB packs or whatever to power the camera, and those, I mean, the battery life is insane. So they plug those into the USB and just power via USB, and it's a long, long battery life. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Yeah, well, there are these portable battery things that you can, and honestly, people use them for their phones, that you can just charge up, and then you can just use the USB port it right in and power it. They're like $50 or something like that. So remember, you're only limited by your creativity with these cameras. So, all right, we're going to talk a little bit again. We kind of really went over this, all right. But the viewfinder. This is kind of what I was talking about before when you're using the what you see is what you get. For those of you that, I tend to navigate a lot towards black and white, so I mean that's where I find a lot of my exposure values I can get. So I'll record a black and white JPEG and then run my raw file in and convert it when I need to and just get the best of both worlds that I can out of the files. But what you see is what you get. So those of you, let me ask you a question. I really want to know this. Do any people really use creative styles in here yet? Anybody? Okay. Okay. I like that. I think you're a little bit hesitant. Because I'm not going to preach against it, but I find it fascinating, and I'm going to show you some of the examples I did the other night. All right, those of you do any strobe work? Does anyone do any strobe work? Studio strobes? Okay. Do you know about the live view display setting? Okay, so for example, if you're looking and you're trying to use strobes, those of us, I have a studio environment where I like to get things as dark as I can so that I can let all my strobe light control all my ambient. If you have your live view setting display on, it's not going to work too well because you're not going to be able to focus on your subject because everything's going to be pitch black. So what you can do is in this menu here, basically in your gear menu, tab 3, you can change that off when you're using strobes, and basically what it'll do is change your viewfinder just into available light, so it's almost like using an optical, like a DSLR. So you can see what you're going to get. It's just you're not going to see your exposure values, your depth of field, or anything like that. It's going to bypass that entirely. But if you're a studio shooter, that's very important because there's nothing that will upset you more than not being able to take the full, to really run that.
So does it just temporarily jack up the ISO to accomplish that? As soon as you
Yeah, it compensates. Yeah, it's metering. Yeah, just exactly.
So to get the view, it just jumps up the ISO.
Yeah.
As soon as you hit the button, drops it down to whatever you have to set to.
Yep. Yep.
So you do that if you're just using, let's say, an LED light?
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. And then you can just obviously just use traditional metering methods at that point. But don't forget to turn it back on because then you're just going to be like, wait a minute. Every exposure, as long as you keep it, you get used to seeing the exposure values change so much and so often through your viewfinder that you totally disregard the fact that I'm changing my shutter speed, my aperture, and nothing's happening. And that's, but you're just, your meter down below the screen is just going all over the place. And by the way, I want someone to tell me if I do not talk about this at all, but clear image zoom, because I don't believe they included this on this presentation. I think it's a very important feature for these cameras. Get back to me on that, okay? I'm going to keep running through the presentation, but just someone remind me. Function button and menu. Anybody that has ever seen me talk, this is the most important part of these cameras. And a lot of people don't realize this, that you have all the power of the menu systems all at the press of your function key. So on the rear button right there, let's circle it out. Okay, that's your function button. That by far is going to be your roadmap and your key to this whole camera system. So basically when you hit it, you have got 12 different banks down here, all right? Is everyone really familiar with the function menu yet? Okay, then you know that you can change each assignable button up to 34 different options. So you go into gear menu number 6. You have all these function upper 6 through 12. And you can change it to your dry mode, creative picture settings, white balance, flash metering, everything, whatever you want. You can put there at your fingertips. And that's going to navigate because I don't know how many of you use more than 12 features on an everyday instance. But I usually set mine up, and I've been using these cameras for a long time, and I have yet to really change anything out. Does that make sense?
On-screen buttons you're referring to, right?
On the function button, correct. Yeah. When you hit the, yep. Yeah, we haven't talked about the buttons yet. We haven't talked about the buttons yet. These cameras, folks, they're as manual as you want them to be. They're as automatic as you want them to be. If you want to go ahead and fly by factory settings, more power to you. But what I love about these cameras and what make my shooting experience so much better is that I can change anything the way that I see it. My camera is not going to be the same as yours, as yours, as yours. The model names might be the same, but I guarantee you all the features that run around it are not. Yes? He's asking me what tab is the function created. It is under the gear menu 6.
Is there any good indications?
I'm sorry, sir?
Any good indications to change some of those function buttons?
Well, we can. That's a good question as far as how to change them and what, but it's going to be application based. Like, what is your application? If you're much more of a studio shooter, or if you're an action wildlife shooter, and you're going to portrait mode settings and so forth, if you change gradually, if you change abruptly, I think those are all going to be. But it's very, very personal, or subjective, I could say. I will tell you this, that there are certain ones, like picture modes for me, I think is very important because I float between black and white and standard quite a bit, and you can change them. Also, some people, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, is dynamic range, optimization versus HDR, high dynamic range photography. Those are also very important things for landscape shooting. A lot of people have that as one of their hotkeys. But again, I think as we're going to see here in a few minutes, these aren't the only ways that you're going to be able to change that. The whole back of the camera is fully customizable as well. So it's just a matter of which route you want to go get. And honestly, you know, besides running in your function menu, you can also run it through on your live display. So when you're looking at the back of your EVF, or I'm sorry, the the LCD, you can hit the display button, you know, and change which way if you want your viewfinder just set up, which is the way I usually do it. I like to have my LCD clean. I don't like to have a lot of like little this is on, this is on, this is on, this is on, which is how the viewfinder slide was set up originally earlier in the presentation. The way that I like it is very clean, but some people like to have the histogram set up, all their exposure values, and then of course you can have the function buttons set up there too. So if you have that display set up and you're looking at the back of your screen for if you really want even easier and quicker accessibility to it, you just hit the function key with that and that'll automatically operate that menu for you. So you don't have to wait for a few seconds or whatever, but I don't mind it, but that's just a different way that some people operate. All right, now we're going to talk about the buttons. So as I said, these are as manual as you want them to be. They're as automatically as you want them to be. And especially if you're someone like me who uses a lot of third-party lenses in certain scenarios, my camera is set up really to be user-friendly for those areas because I need, what are the keys for using manual focus lenses, these cameras? Anyone, who uses third-party lenses a lot for manual focus? How do you have yours set up?
Which specifically, what do you mean?
Oh, there you go. Nice. All right. Sorry, I'm looking. Nice. As far as optimizing for manual focus, what do you do? Do you just look through the back of the camera, or what do you do?
I have my C3 button set up for manual versus
Okay.
single shoot auto, whatever.
Okay. Do you use magnification at all?
On occasion.
Peaking?
But peaking I use.
Okay.
Peaking I have set up for mid and yellow.
Yeah, hey, you sure you haven't been in my class before? Because that's what I do too. It's better contrast values for medium yellow. So we're going to go over this here in just a second. So all of these buttons are fully customizable, and that's another difference between version 1 and version 2. Version 1, I believe, only has one customizable button up front because the shutter is not as it's not as protruded. It's recessed a little bit back. But now you've got all of these. You can even change your ISO. You can change the trash can. Well, the trash can actually is a C4, but you have a record button for video you can change. You can pretty much whatever you want. And I think it's very important for the way you set up. Now, for me personally, for using manual focus lenses, I actually have C3 programmed as my focus magnifier. So as soon as I put the camera up, I can just double click if I really need to. If I'm shooting, those of us, look, we all love to shoot wide open now, right? We all want the best depth of field possible. So what you need to do is to make sure that what you want in focus is going to be precise. So I hit my magnify in someone's face, make sure that the eyes are in focus, and then usually I'll have focus peaking engaged, which I think we'll be showing here shortly. But what that is basically highlighting your subject to make sure it'll show what's in focus for you. And it's either medium to low to me, because I don't want to hijack my composition too much, just because I really like to see what I'm shooting. So the way that we can customize those buttons is we go back to under our gear, under the menu 6, might even be menu 7 on one of the other models. But it's either menu 6 or menu 7, and you can go to your custom key settings, and you can control your control wheel, your custom button 1, your custom button 2, 3, so forth, centers. I mean, you show it. Please get in there, change it the way you see fit. Like I said before, I've changed mine once or twice, but I rarely go back and change anything. I have everything I want the way I have it set. The only time I go back and check is when I have my cameras loaned out or I'm at a show with them and someone totally jacks it up, which happens more often than not. I had one show, I might have been the B&H Optic event actually, and I had one person, I think they were playing a joke on me. I kid you not, they had IAF, every single button was IAF. So I had to go back and change everything, but it was a prank. Focus. We have a lot of focus options on these cameras, which is also an important part of your function menu. So that I would definitely have in there as your focus areas for those, because we have a very complex autofocusing system. We're going to talk about it here. We got wide, zone, center point, selectable, floating, fixed point. What did I say, fixed point? No, I meant selectable, floating point. I typically run like I said, I'm a less is more. I like to go center, spot, recompose. Center, lock, do what I need to do. It's important to understand what these things do here. So from a wide AF, who mainly uses wide AF? Anybody? We're basically, you're basically anywhere up to 425 focus points, whatever your model your camera using, that is where it's gonna choose the focus plane. You don't have a lot of control. You get a lot of people that kind of certain like, well, this isn't what I wanted in focus. If your subject is way over here and you have other things that they're kind of more decisive factors in your composition. But that's much more of, it's where the camera, I believe, is defaulted. I mean, the success ratio is very, very high. I tend to demand a little bit more control out of it, so I usually stay away into center point or flexible spot. But, I mean, there you go. And like we said before, that's why our sensors can be so great, because we're taking the full range of the sensor that we can autofocus. And it's mainly a front priority. All right, center point. Just whenever that center point is active. Floating point. Now, with flexible spot, we need to talk a little bit more about it. How many people use flexible spot? Is anyone frustrated with flexible spot?
Yeah.
Let me guess, because as soon as you shoot, there's no joystick so that you can reselect your point. Is that right? I agree. So that's why few of us tried to devise a little bit of a workaround for this area. So this is what I suggest doing, is that for flexible spot, basically is I have it all set up, but most people will have their center button, like on the rear of their camera, set up so that it'll be set on the control. So we go back to our control, program our control buttons, set it to focus mode. So as soon as you take your picture, hit that button, you get your flexible spot back again. I would set it to this center button. I would set, yeah. Because you have your button, you have your shutter, you're up already, you have your thumb already there. And then it's just going to become second nature. I mean, how many of you, do we have any recovering Nikon users here? Anybody? Okay, were you rear focus or no?
I know she's taking my glasses off.
No, I'm sorry, man. Rear focus button. Basically, the thing about with Nikon is to have the better autofocus. Using autofocus, the more precise autofocus was to use the rear button autofocus, the servo on the rear button. So we have a lot of users, obviously, that are coming out of our system that want a rear button autofocus, which you can do. But this is kind of one of those things that you just kind of train yourself over and over. Like for me, I mean, I'm being honest, I can tell, I said earlier that my power usage, I don't really have a problem with batteries. I think some of that has to do with, I think I used to use Leica quite a bit, and anytime I wasn't using the camera, I'd be power off, always, because those batteries didn't last much longer either. It's a very small camera. So with this, when the Sony goes to my hip, off. I just automatically, because your fire up speed with these cameras is 40% better than most other camera on the planet from an electronics stand of view. So you're not really losing much, but I mean, I think it's important to understand from this power consumption, different ways that you yourself can help. Okay, let's see where we are. Focus area. Okay, focus lock. Yay. I enjoy center focus. I like focus lock, holding the shutter halfway down, going to town with it, really composing. But this type of composition is a little bit of wasted space at the bottom. So the way that you use it with center focus lock is you just kind of, oh, there you go. Okay. You kind of make better use of your space. So as I said before, the way that I use it is on focus lock is I have my composition. Even if it's off center, lock, recompose, fire. Rock, recompose, fire. I mean, I don't think that's not really rocket science. I think sometimes you have to condition yourself to it, because sometimes you're really used to the computer doing most of the work on the camera and automating your autofocusing. But for me, I find it much more pleasant shooting experience when I'm doing it myself. Autofocus modes and manual focus. So of course, we know with AFS, we're dealing with mainly still life, portraits, posing. I have 3 dogs, and I have a 3-year-old toddler, so I don't get too much of that. So more often than not right now, I can be an AFC, which is continuous. So it's a faster autofocus rate. You can lock on your targets. With these cameras, you can pretty much follow them all around the screen if you want. That's a hybrid 4D autofocusing system that the A7R2 takes full advantage of, as well as the A6300, of course, which has the fastest autofocus ever. IAF, does anyone use IAF? Okay. And you use a lot of depth wide open, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a lot of great lenses out right now, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. The 85-1.4, the 50-1.4, 35-1.4. Anytime you deal with a lot of these lenses, even the 24-70 2.8. How many people in here shoot wide open and just sometimes just really get a lovely, gorgeous nose focus in there and then miss the eyes? Okay? Right. Well, our IAF kind of takes care of that. And the way to set it up is you can go into your custom settings. Some people, I think the auto exposure lock button is kind of, in a lot of areas, I don't use it, so that's one area that you can change it to. And then you can change your AEL to IAF. Now that being said, this is also a good segue also to go in here. And here, what we're going to do is we're going to show you a quick example of it. So that's one of my coworkers, Hector, and those are his lovely brown eyes. And then this was actually, I think this one coming up here, this is the first shot I ever took, I think, with the 85-1.4, and you can see using IAF. And that lens is actually cranked, that's at 5.6, and then the 85-1.4G, and so you can automatically see, we can talk about this here in a little bit, just the lovely defocusing that this can to make these subjects pop out. But IAF certainly, it does the trick. Now, those of you that, I mean, let's just take a look real quick right here on my lenses. You can also program that you don't want to, if you don't want to have a button here customized, you've got a focus lock button programmed right here on your button. You can also use this as your IAF button. Ah.
That's what that's.
Yep, so you can use that on that, the 24-70 to 85-1.4, the 70 to 200. A certain number of lenses. Any lens that you have of ours that does have this button here can be programmed to focus lock. Focus peaking manual focus. We were talking about this, those of us that love third-party lenses. Brief little history. I'm going to sidebar it really quick here. I used to be a Leica shooter along with my Nikons, and then I had all this lovely glass, lovely Leica digital, and then I got married, and then basically my wife is basically wearing my M9 on her finger now. So I have a lot of lenses that I still have. So that's the reason I really went to Sony, was because that's the only thing I could use it on. But as soon as I found, here you go, we got focus peaking. So this is what it looks like in the flesh. For those of you that, honestly, I probably wouldn't use a manual focus on action sports, especially with a shallow depth of field like that, but more power to you. Some shooters find this very useful, and some of them do work in video modes if you're shooting video with them. Others, for all intents and purposes, do not, because it takes up a lot of computing power. But let's just go over some of these here. You've got your straight images. These are all what you've got: toy camera, pop color, retro, mono, miniatures, which is more like a tilt shift, watercolor, so forth and so forth. These are all carried over from the NEX days. A lot of these, like I mentioned earlier before, Sony likes to give a lot of things, but they do not like to take away. So these are available in our full frame systems, and pretty much all the mirrorless systems. And as some of you have said that you do use them, so remain unnamed. But here we go. So you can do certain things like painting mode, which will bring out a much more illustration-like elements of photos. It's kind of like weird. Like when my mother is a watercolor artist, and she's like, your photo looks great, can I paint it? And sometimes I really do not. I mean, it feels kind of insulting to me. It's not meant to be a painting. So this is Illustrator mode. I really did not like this photo at all. So last night I decided, while I was putting this presentation together, that I would try to take a few photos of myself to see how it would work. This is my dog Django, and as you can see, I still don't like it. This is my son Nicholas. No, don't like it either. And this is this morning, my backyard. I mean, take it whatever. It's not for me, but those are clear examples of kind of what it can do. Partial color. People do find this very useful. This is very popular with a lot of things that you see out there. You've got yellow, green, blue, and red. And you'll be able to select this. So when you select partial color under the menu settings, you can select which color you want to see. Example, partial color red. Great advertisement for Wells Fargo. I'm sure Target would love it too. So, all right, let's see here. High contrast black and white is one that I will use on occasion. That's with the no picture effect and the high contrast. For stock photography, it tends to work really well because it can create storytelling events, you know, out of otherwise fairly bland subject matter. Miniature. I will tell you that one of our higher ups at as far as educators for Sony does shoot in this, and he does sell photos in miniature mode. So it's like a tilt shift. I could see where this kind of would be useful because I used to spend, I mean, I don't know how many of you guys have spent quite a few times adding layer upon layer of certain defocusing filters to kind of get that type of effect with certain photos in Lightroom or Photoshop or whatever have you. But these will do it all in camera for you and fairly quickly. HDR, DRO. Who turns a DRO off? Anybody? I mean, besides me? All our events for for anyone demoing our gear, I have to tell you, all the cameras come shipped to us with DRO on. And one of my jobs was like, we set our dates, get everything like that, get the correct, you know, we go to an Adobe color space and not sRGB because these guys want to print a little bit. And then we turn the DRO off because I think you just want a little bit more control, and let's go into that here. So this is basically what we're looking at. HDR, what does HDR do? Anybody? Combines a certain number of images, taking your highlights, your shadows, your midtones, and getting the best out of all three of them and just flatten them out into one image. Again, this is JPEG only. DRO is basically automatically having a special algorithm in the CPU of our cameras that basically will do almost the same thing. So, and you have levels. You have an auto mode and you have levels of sensitivity 1 through 5. 1 being the lowest amount of sensitivity, 5 being the highest amount of sensitivity. So you got DRO off here, and then you have your DR level 5. You can see the shadows are picking up, and your background tones. You're getting a little bit more depth, right? That is one of the special things. It's almost, other companies have them under like active D lighting and so forth. Ours is just called DRO, for Dynamic Range Optimizer. Yeah, basically it's an algorithm, exactly, but it's taking all the available information that sensor picked up, and it's calculating the results for you. So instead of bringing it into a post-production process where you can really, look, and I don't know about you guys, but one of the greatest things for me is taking our post-production my raw files into a post-production like Capture One or even Lightroom, and just taking if I'm especially in a high contrast scene with a lot of dark shadows, and just moving that shadow slider gradually up and seeing how much more information there is there in those files and how clear it is. But that's pretty much what it is, except it's crunching the highlights and the shadows and just finding an acceptable level for you. But seriously, like our cameras, I mean, they scream in the shadows. I mean, they work really well, but you will see so much data, and it is clean. So please, don't ignore your shadow slider in post-production. All right, we did already cross image stabilization. Some of these things do kind of cross over from presentation to presentation. So let me just, saw my kid, saw that, yep, okay. So here are some examples. I mean, as far as your handhold image stabilization on, when it might be kind of off. Like I said, you can get almost 4.5 more stops using handheld with your image stabilizer on. I mean, there's nothing like it. Part of me wants to go over there and just take the camera off and just go in everybody's face, see it. But I mean, you already have the cameras anyway, so you know. I don't really recommend doing that just on your own. And it is working with adapted lenses. So those of you that have your Canon lenses, does work. You do not need to turn the stabilizer on because they don't really talk to each other.
Can you program stabilization in your function menu?
You know what? That's a good question. I have not tried that. The question is if you can program image stabilization inside the function menu. My initial reaction is to say probably not, but I'm gonna look into that. So we'll play with that after this. Okay, we talked about this E-mount. right? E-mount, okay. So APS-C format and full frame cameras. We all know the full frame sensor versus the APS-C sensor. Here's what an E-mount lens normally on full frame mode will look on our cameras. But now, of course, you know, that is what will happen as soon as you engage onto one of our cameras, it will go to APS-C crop mode. So what does that make the A7R2? That makes the A7R2 probably the most powerful APS-C crop camera on the planet, as well as the most powerful full frame sensor. Okay, so obviously this is showing you here, we've going through the GUI if you want to do it automatically, or you want to turn it off if you do like that little fisheye, like that little vignette, not fisheye, but ultra vignetting look. Some people do, so you can turn it off. And by the way, this goes without saying, this is honestly, let's sit here and talk about this for a second here, because I know I wanted someone to remind me about setting up clear image zoom. Does anyone know what clear image zoom is? Okay, well, our still cameras have it too. And this is a feature that I cannot believe so many people do not know about, and I'm going to put myself in that camp until I join. And I think I was actually sitting, this is before I've still never really been fully trained, but my boss, Florian, was doing classes here like this, and the first A7 class I ever saw, I was sitting in that back row. And he went over clear image zoom, and I went, what? So what clear image zoom is, basically in your camera, you have a 2-time digital intuitive zoom planted right in. Now, it is a little bit of a crop on your sensor, but what it'll do is it'll take any lens, and you can change your zoom from optical to digital, and we have to do this in camera. In fact, that might be in the other presentation, and I might be able to show you a little bit through it, but anyone who wants to on their camera, I can do it after this. But almost every single lens that we have, except for the power zooms, you'll be able to hit a button, and it is on, okay, JPEG only disclaimer, but what'll happen is you engage the clear image zoom, you have to program a custom button for it, and you'll see a magnifying glass, and you'll be able to scroll wheel all the way 1, 1, 2, 1, 4, 1, 6, all the way up to 2 times. So if you've got a 35 millimeter prime lens, that's going to make effectively, you can make it a 70 millimeter lens. All just like that. You have it in your camera right now. A lot of people just don't know how to use it. Being a professional photographer, and look, I'm a raw guy, but I'm not even going to say someone's name here, but there's a very, very famous photographer that I took, and I spent a lot of money going to this class for 4 days, and the first thing he says, he was like, you know, I don't even know what RAW, I don't shoot RAW, all I do is shoot JPEGs and give it off to my post guy, and that's it. I mean, I was a great portrait photographer, and I'm like, really? I mean, and yes, I need a RAW file. I'm telling you, I need a RAW file. But you're dealing in the golden age of sensors right now, where you're sitting on a 42 megapixel sensor. You got the closest thing to medium format. I mean, you don't really, I don't know how many of you guys are going to really need to blow them up that big through a RAW file. I mean, I think you're discounting it too much. And I'm going against something that I would have said probably over a year ago. But after being around these cameras as long as I have been and just shooting them constantly, not to mention just shooting them, but also what I was telling you before is Wi-Fiing them off, because they're not Wi-Fiing off RAW files. But the dynamic rings that are inside those files, I'm like, I don't really have to do much. I mean, all of my levels are there. I mean, they're there in JPEG or RAW. RAW is just a bigger file. It's flatter. I mean, they're meant to be post-processed. I mean, the JPEG, and I'm not discounting. I mean, believe me, like I said, I mainly shoot RAW. But do not think that JPEG is a poor man's game. It is not anymore at all. And I'm telling you, more photographers than you know often are shooting JPEGs. I mean, media management for one thing. I mean, I don't know how many people have time. I don't know how long. If you've ever filed over a few hundred RAW files at 80 megabytes per second on a slow bandwidth, I mean, especially when you're in a job like a newswire or anything like that, you're not shooting over RAW files. White balance. Anybody use, I'm sure you use custom white balancing, right, for studio strobes and everything? Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the features that I think a lot of people like to sit on auto white balance. I'd encourage you to go different because you can be so much more creative about it. In fact, I've done seminar after seminar, and it gets me so inspired every time coming out of how different ways to set up your white balance, especially when you're using different kind of lights. But these are obviously the basics, and I'm going to be honest, I took this picture off the internet. It's not my cat, so. But this is another creative way to use it, using incandescent setting outdoors instead of using a certain setting to really make the sea and kind of blue and yellows pop. At least what you're looking for. I mean, I encourage everyone, especially that come to any of these things, pre-visualize, don't react. I mean, it's a difference between taking a snapshot and a photograph. I mean, really looking at trying to get as much out of your camera as you can. Now, that being said, I can totally understand what you're saying. I mean, especially if you're vacation, you're shooting, or you're doing something with kids and you don't have time to keep going back and forth. Yes, your raw file, absolutely. White balance is critical. I mean, you don't need to worry about your white balance. Bracketing with self-timer. So you do have this in your camera as well. So basically you want to set up your camera on a tripod. You can select a number of shots to do an HDR. Why would you use it? Honestly, it's well, for stabilization for one, obviously, for longer exposures. And you don't necessarily need to buy a remote for it too. So those of you that don't have a handheld remote or anything like that. And of course, that leads us to the next subject, pretty much, I think, coming up on the apps as far as how you can use the remote. Because I believe you all do have, does anyone use smart remote on your cameras yet? Is it upgraded? Seriously, I didn't update mine until last week. If you haven't gone from version 1 to version 4 of the app, you have no idea what you're missing. I mean, you have full exposure control, aperture, shutter speed, ISO. Basically what we're talking about here is in your camera, and Sony has a heavily vested interest in apps, just like they're on your phone. Instead of on your phone, they're in your camera. We have our own app store that you can get through them, and we're going to talk about them here a little bit. I mean, at last count, there were over 30 of them, 29 to 30, doing all types of certain things. But Smart Remote comes free in that it is on your camera, and you can engage it by using your smart device. Basically, what happens is they create a Wi-Fi hotspot together, and then you can just trigger off. It does not have an intervalometer on it, but it does the job pretty well. Silent shooting. Who uses silent shutter? Anybody? Okay. Does anyone know that what it is? Okay. We have an electronic shutter built into our camera, and one of the assets is that you can do silent shooting. So for, let's see, which camera? I'm going to base this on that no one has touched my camera in the past week and a half. Let's see here. Okay, no, that's not it.
Sounds when you focus, like, squeaking. You also can
8514. This is another. That's a good question. Well, the gentleman is talking about the squeaking and the focus. Now let's see here. That's me focusing right now. That's totally silent. So there's my shutter right there. Let's hold on. Let me check on the R2. Maybe that's. I don't want to waste anybody's time by going customizing that. Okay. So basically, I have C1 programmed on my camera, and it is now on, and now nothing. Totally silent. So what that is basically there is no curtain from the shutter right now. Basically what's happening is the sensor is turning on and it's turning off. Caveats are, it can only be used in single shot mode, not continuous. Cannot be used with strobes because the hot shoe is not engaged. Basically what it is it's almost like a 4K video still going off on your camera. There are some, believe me, there can be some problems. Not too many, but this is important to understand, is that when you're going around, you have ultra-fast moving subjects or fast lights, for example, can create some type of banding. Now, why that is because we're dealing with a rolling shutter here. Does anyone know what rolling shutter versus global shutter? Okay, global shutter is what? Everything goes off at once. Full readout. What's a rolling shutter? Scans it. It's not going off all at once. It's part by part. So like you watch a fan go around, for example, or a helicopter blades, and some images you'll see that the helicopter blades are actually looking bent. It's because they're going so fast that it's just not picking it up all at the same time. So those are certain things that you have to be wary of when you're working, indoors, under, hospital lights, things like that could occur if you're not too careful. You just have to be careful about it. Lenses. Here we go. Favorite topic. Yay. As you can see, this is an older picture too. You can use any of our FE lenses, and listen, this is the difference. E-mount is APS-C. That's for like the A6300 NEX series. Some great glass there, but it is an APS-C. It's a smaller opening. The full frame glass is FE. So like the FE-G series, G-Master. You have other brands out there. Zeiss has the baddest line. Voigtlander has just started shipping some new lenses for us. I mean, it kind of goes on and on and on. And of course, we can actually, this is just an example. For those of you that haven't tried out our 28 f2, I mean, it's a very affordable lens, and it's awesome. I mean, this is actually has two converters. It has a fisheye converter and a wide-angle converter that goes down to a 21. And I mean, it's just, I shoot with that quite a bit. That was the first time I ever shot with it. It was at Eastern State Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. But you get some really cool compositions out of it. The 55-1.8 is the go-to de facto lens for our cameras. It was one of the first lenses released. It is a classic. It is one of the sharpest lenses I've ever used. It's small. It's just, there's nothing negative about it. It's everything I want in a lens. This is basically using, I think, the Tamron Alpha Mount 150 to 600 with a teleconverter. So those are obviously other lenses that you can use. The typical Alpha mounts, you've got two different adapters. Obviously, if you're using the A7R2, you can use the LAEA3, I believe, which basically you can, because you're utilizing phase detection on the autofocus on those cameras. And now let's talk about these lenses really quick here. I mean, the science behind them, basically all the G-Masters have an extreme spherical element basically posted at the front. Their coatings are, and let's just talk about resolution for standpoint, because we're talking about really high resolving sensors out of these cameras. I mean, you're talking about resolution no one's really been able to do before in a DSLR or a mirrorless system, whatever have you. But I mean, they have 30 lines of resolution per millimeter. That's a standard. Ours are 50. So we are future-proofing our lenses through 8K, beyond. I mean, really taking full advantage of the sensor. So I mean, you have much deeper resolution on the G-Master series than you do pretty much almost any other lens on the planet, whatever the brand. I mean, now that being said, we're going to talk about look. I mean, you can't obviously get in a really nice macro shot here with an 85. You know, the focusing distance is quite different. I mean, I think that's definitely going to be another application scenario. I mean, I love the 90, but I mean, I love the 85 too, but the 90 is, I mean, I've been using the 90 steadily for a long time, and I mean, ever since it came out. I just think it has such a great look to it. But for portraits, I'm going to gravitate towards the 85-1.4. That brings us up to third-party lenses. Look, most people that first came into this system, like myself, you had a handful of lenses. But me, I was out Leica, and I had a lot of Nikon glass, and I was looking for something that I could use everything on. And that's what really attracted me to this system in the first place. That you now have adapters. I mean, certainly if you're a Canon, if you're using Canon and thinking of coming over, I mean, there's really no better time to do it, because our cameras, in a lot of cases with the L series glass, can shoot them faster and, you know, better than Canon can. I mean, in a lot of scenarios. I mean, if you want, I think we have a Nikon, I think we have an A7R2 over there with a 24-70 that you can try out and just see how fast that autofocus is. Those of us that have Nikon, basically they have a Velo autofocus adapter over there right now that's also works fairly well for Nikon. I don't know if it's the level of that Canon, but because basically Canon and Sony both use a phase detection autofocus technology. Novaflex, a lot of these are other great brands. I mean, I actually shot this, I think, a week and a half ago. This is a Voigtlander 15 on the M mount on my A7R2. That's the new Oculus. I mean, I just kind of shoot around. These are all Wi-Fi'd from my camera, my phone too, by the way, so they're not even full resolution. This is, when you talk about macro, I mean, that's the Nikon 55-35. So if you want a macro lens that does great, almost the closest thing to medium format on the A7R2, it's under $100 used. And of course, you can go to the other end. That's a Leica 50 Summilux, which is a little bit more. You're only limited by your creativity here. I'm going to tell you something. Before we came into this class today, I was out by the kiosk, and I don't know if you know this guy, but if you're here at B&H or any other stores, does anyone know Lazarus? No one knows Lazarus. Okay, there's this guy named Lazarus Baptiste. This guy is crazy. He's actually Gayle King's makeup artist during the day, but at night he goes out and he takes our cameras and he does a heck of a lot of shooting. And the way that I met him is because I make the rounds here of all these local dealers, and he goes to every single one, and he has his little tablet, and he's showing all these HDR images he takes. And he doesn't just do HDR. This was put up last year in Germany. This is an 18-foot, it's the world's largest print, and it was shot on an A7 II. But basically what he does is he does HDR stitching. So this is actually about 80 different photographs that's all stitched together. And he goes out every night and does this. I think his website's lazarus2020.com. He doesn't have anything on there because he's really trying to get into the exhibition market. But he was out there right before we came in, and he was showing me some new stuff. And to be honest with you, he owes me some work because I gave him a set of G Masters, and I was like, I hadn't seen him in a while. And I was like, Lazarus, where's my stuff? He's like, oh, I'll get it to you. But seriously, like, this is just an A7 II, and that's an 18-foot print on a metallic print that is now in display. Actually, has a whole other exhibition over there now. And some of the other work is just really, really good. I mean, obviously, if you're in New York, you do, and on the Jersey side like me, you do tend to see this sometimes. But you can literally zoom in and you can see inside the people's windows at some point because he's using these 400mm lenses and just blocking off. And he has this special head that he goes back, and it takes a long time to do. But I mean, it's important to look at that and just see, like, this type of stuff is being generated by our cameras. Apps. Oh, my favorite. And actually, those of you that are actively using apps can probably teach this a lot better than I can. But basically, they're from using a tablet, iPhone. Honestly, if you're having an Android and you have an FS, it's going to work a little bit better because you can just touch your camera over to your phone or whatever, and things automatically transfer. Those of us that have iPhones, we have to take a few more steps to set up our wireless, but all is good. But this is how you go. You have an application list. This square button right here is your application menu. So you can see what apps you have in here, and then you have your smart remote over here, which is embedded, but it does not automatically upgrade. So I encourage every single one of you, if you ever intend to use a wireless remote or whatever access, go home and plug in your computer. Don't unplug it until the install is done, but install version 4 of this smart remote because it is phenomenal. Let's see here. These are a list of some little apps that you can do. Star Trail is very popular unless you live in Manhattan. You know, it's funny. I have my teammates, I mean, basically they're Portland, Denver, I mean, a lot of areas where you can get it. And almost every weekend they're out with groups doing these overnight photo shoots, doing this stuff. I'm like, I still have yet to be able to really do it. Motion time-lapse is very, very popular. Bracketing pros, so that's an advanced HDR functionality. It's all very, very cool stuff. And apps just keep coming. And they're reasonably priced. They're about $4.99, $5 a shot. Those of you that do any type of action motion shot is really a necessity. It's just such a great app. And then, of course, okay, we went this. I already showed you this. Okay, Capture One. Those of you that don't know, Capture One is pretty much, I think, the preferred resource for RAW converting for Sony. It reads Sony RAW files better, the skin tones, all the tonality tend to breathe a little bit better than that in Adobe. And I'm a Lightroom apologist. I've been using Lightroom for God knows how long. But one great thing with Capture One is you get it free with our cameras. Those of you that didn't know it, you get Capture One for free. So you have a RAW converter for free with our cameras. Let's see if that's something that's, okay. Tethering is the only thing that you do not get. So if you do live tether, it's $50 more, but still, I mean, how much is this Lightroom, you know, $300? So, but everything else is for free. So if you're not concerned about tethering, you do get Capture One for free, and it is the most powerful converter ever. I mean, those of you that have ever used a Phase 1 back or Phase 1 medium format camera, you know this engine. I mean, because I've been using Capture One, especially when you're using, you know, if you're in heavy-duty studio shots with medium format cameras. I mean, it does things that you just won't believe. And it's a very intuitive interface, and it's very easy to use. Now, there's also, this is, by the way, if you do want to set up tethering for your cameras, here's the USB connection. You go to the PC remote, That's where you set it. That's where you set up your connection. You have to redirect your connection to PC remote, and then that'll read it for tethering. So if you tend to with Capture One, Lightroom will not tether with us yet. And that's kind of the interface. But you can change anything from there. Especially if you want to remote shoot, you can remote shoot from the deck of the your desktop and everything like that. You don't have to use a camera. You can just set it up, and then you can use it as shutter. You can change all the camera information for the most part through the interface there. Now, remote camera capture is a free app that we offer from Sony that basically will not have a live readout. You can control it from the desktop. Now, you can do a workaround by setting up Lightroom as your import folder, and that's where you can see all your files if you want to go the remote camera control, or capture, remote camera captured. You know, I think theoretically, we had a discussion about this at one of our conferences as far as the heat issue goes, because there's another camera that's coming out that has a very small frame, very powerful sensor, and a big battery, and it heats up really fast. I mean, really fast. And we're like, the signal-to-noise ratio has to be, it really has to increase some of those noise that are coming into the sensor. But for us, on ours, I've never heard of that happening. I've never heard of that happening ever. I think if you did have any concerns about that, there are some workarounds. I mean, certainly, for those of us, I mean, I don't know how many of you do video applications, but I use an off-camera recorder to record 10-bit files too, so that it's easier for me. But I mean, I use that monitor as my focusing platform, and I don't really use the rear screen. But I mean, that's one way if you do have some concerns, but I have not seen that yet, no. This is kind of, if those of you that are wondering about our new G Master lenses, these are some samples that were taken in Iceland. It's pretty hard to argue with those results. There we go. And then fine. That is, okay, we got this. Hold on, let me, okay, clear image zoom. Here we go. So, okay, you got a 200 millimeter optical. Equals 400 millimeters. All right, pretty simple, right? Well, thanks a lot for coming, everybody. Thanks a lot for listening to musings. Thanks. All right, thanks.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.